Most of us consider homelessness a social or perhaps an economic problem. But a medical condition? Hawaii's Senate Bill 2, empowering doctors to write a prescription for housing. Ahead on Wide Angle. For as long as governments have allowed our basic human needs to be more commodity than right, there have been those of us who have experienced homelessness. But short of changing the very structure of our economy, might some new way of perceiving this persistent problem spare us that hardship? Joining me today is Josh Greene, a practicing physician who was elected to the Hawaii House of Representatives back in 2004 and the state Senate in 2008. Senate Bill 2, of which Josh is a lead sponsor, is the focus of our conversation today. Welcome to Wide Angle, Josh.
Thank you for having me, Peter. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to have you. I guess I'd like to take a step back because in the introduction, I introduced the notion of homelessness in Hawaii. And I think for many people who know of Hawaii but maybe haven't visited, the idea of those two existing in the same sentence seems a little strange, yeah? Additionally, I guess the message on your homepage may cause a little dissonance, and it suggests more of that same. The most pressing issue in Hawaii today, it reads, is homelessness. So I guess I'd like to ask you, particularly for we mainlanders who maybe don't know, what's going on in Hawaii with homelessness?
Well, we've had a surge in homelessness over the past couple decades. We have socioeconomic problems like everyone. People think of Hawaii as paradise, which in many ways it is. But in the early 2000s, we had the epidemic of methamphetamine abuse, for instance, just like a lot of rural states did. And because there's an imbalance in society where the rich have gotten much richer and people who struggle have struggled even more, we've also seen that in Hawaii. It's very expensive to live here. So it's expensive to buy property, it's expensive to rent property, and individuals who are working at or near minimum wage, they can't possibly afford housing here. So we've seen a surge in homelessness. And also, because it's very warm in Hawaii and the climate's very welcoming, a lot of people will come to Hawaii, in some cases with one-way tickets, and then live here, but find themselves in a very tough bind. So we have seen a lot of that as well.
Okay, all right. One of the ways that homelessness plays out, that you are particularly a witness to, is in hospital emergency rooms across the country. Certainly Hawaii is no different in that respect. Unlike many of your fellow legislators in Hawaii, being an emergency room doctor, you have a front row seat to how that drama unfolds, yeah? If you could, what have you seen from your vantage as a doctor?
It's very relevant to this issue. In fact, I wrote that bill on the back of an envelope while on call in the hospital between patients. So what I've witnessed, I've been an ER doc for 17 years in Hawaii since I came here. I see individuals who are struggling greatly. I see individuals who are homeless. About 30% of our ER population is now made up of individuals who are homeless, especially in Honolulu. And we see a revolving door. We see people who struggle day in and day out with the same health problems. They're usually either mental illness related, drug addiction related, or infection related. Those three things. Those are the number 1, 2, and 3 issues for us. And when someone has schizophrenia or drug addiction and they don't have a home, they obviously don't have a primary care physician or a nurse practitioner to help take care of them. And the only place they can go for comfort and for help medically is the ER. Right. So I see the exact same people many, many, many times a year. We had one individual, just a beautiful human being, but who suffers with lung disease and mental illness. He came to our ER 241 times last year. His name is Gary. Yeah. He shared his story and openly shares, his history. 241 times Gary came to the ER at our hospitals on Oahu, and he didn't get any better. He was still homeless. He was still staying at a shelter most of the time. Yeah. his lung condition didn't improve because he went back into the elements. His schizophrenia didn't improve because he doesn't take his medications. And his overall bill for those services was $1.2 million. Yeah. So one individual, and this is why we'll talk about why my solution will work, that one individual spent over $1 million when, if we had just gotten a roof over his head, we have studies here, and we'll get into this, that show that his healthcare costs would have dropped over 40%. Yep. And we could have used that to house him for a lifetime or provide any other service. Right. We could have hired a private physician for Gary and a private nurse and housed him and still had $500,000 left over.
Right. Okay. So and let's go to that, talking about Senate Bill number 2, which you say you wrote on the back of an envelope while you were in the emergency room doing your doctoring. You have certainly championed Senate Bill number 2, a piece of legislation that looks to move homelessness from sort of the social domain, where it typically resides, to the medical domain. Yeah. It was first introduced this past session. Can you tell us a little bit about Senate Bill number 2 and what it is that it seeks to do?
You framed it very nicely, Peter. Right now, people think of homelessness as either a social determinant of health or a social issue. Mm-hmm. I changed the way we should think about it in my dialogue. Mm-hmm. If you look at homelessness as a medical condition, and that's what this bill supposes to do, you ask yourself, how can someone say that? Why would a doctor say that? Well, first of all, the underpinnings. The average lifespan of an individual who is homeless in our country, in America, is 51 years. The average lifespan of any individual in America is 77.3 years. Women a little longer, men slightly shorter. Mm-hmm. So if you're homeless for any number of reasons, you will face very difficult chronic health issues and very likely die decades earlier than other people. So analytically, mm-hmm. if you're homeless, you have a medical situation. Right. Also, right now, the way our healthcare system, as you know, is built, is you only can get healthcare services if they can be billed through either insurance or at a community health center or through Medicaid or through Medicare, right? And that means right now this enormous problem, over 500,000 Americans are homeless mm-hmm. on any given night, fall through the cracks. They can't get these services. Yet the moment, this is the idea I had in the ER, mm-hmm. the moment you put a roof over someone's head, we know that they will live basically a normal life like those who are lucky enough to have resources or housing. Mm-hmm. So the bill, to cut to the chase, allows an individual to get a diagnosis of chronic homelessness, which needs to be well defined. I said that chronic homelessness should include, for more than 6 months, one is homeless and have other chronic illnesses like mental illness or drug addiction. It can be shaped in any state like Massachusetts or Rhode Island or New York or California. You set up those criteria, so you're careful with your dollars, you're careful with your programs, and then you allow the people who are closest to the individual who's homeless, mm-hmm. he or she knows their doctor or nurse at the ER or at a clinic. They make the determination, and you prescribe them housing. You prescribe them housing, which will be infinitely more effective than prescribing them expensive treatment for hepatitis or antibiotics for a staph infection or pills that they won't take for their schizophrenia.
Right. And so just to reiterate, certainly what I heard you say there, this is specifically for more chronically homeless people who are more chronically homeless, as opposed to anyone who experiences homelessness.
Right.
Okay.
That's a very important clarification. Yeah. Because some people, when I first floated the idea, confused it with just homelessness, okay? The reason you choose chronic homelessness is because I'm looking at the individuals who are suffering the most. We're not talking about someone who is 21 years old and decides they want to move to Hawaii and be a surfer mm-hmm. and live out of a van. We're talking about someone who has these multiple problems like Gary did and who every day goes in and out of the hospital. Where in Hawaii, and this is true of all other states, the high utilizers or the hyper utilizers that use the healthcare system, if they're homeless, the chronically homeless individuals average about $80,000 of spend per year. The average American spends about $10,000 per year on healthcare. The average individual, the median, is about $80,000 for individuals who are suffering. So some people will argue, well, it's a choice, or Some people do well and they deserve to have a house. You could argue morally both of those cases. But what I'm saying is, from a health economic standpoint, and frankly from a social justice standpoint, but from the health economic standpoint, when you have in every state a very significant budget to consider in Medicaid, if you have a very small number of people, in our case it was about 3.6% of our Medicaid population consumed 61% of our Medicaid budget. So just 13,000 people, and I knew this because I'm the chair of the Human Services Committee now, 13,000 people were consuming $1.2 billion, which averaged $82,000. So at the end of the day, this very small subset of individuals, if we help them better, we can decrease their costs very, very greatly. And we then even commissioned the study to prove it. We studied individuals, and we found that the moment we put them into housing first, which is the best place to put an individual if they've got chronic homelessness, their costs in Hawaii dropped 43%, in Seattle dropped 55%. So a guy like Gary, who spent $1.2 million, we could save $500,000 on his care alone, probably a lot more.
So that gives us a sense of what Senate Bill 2 attempts to do. I'm interested also in one of the things that Senate Bill doesn't seem to do. In our country, certainly we are very focused on notions of individualism and capitalism, where a strong work ethic is repaid, and that shrouds the notion of homelessness sort of in moral terms, It doesn't appear from the Senate bill as I've seen it, or certainly from your website or what I've heard you say about it, as if Senate Bill 2 explores or even discusses in any way a moral aspect to this issue, and I'm asking, why not, number one, and number two, do you think your constituents aren't interested in sort of assessing responsibility, which I think in our culture we frequently will, we may accept that homelessness is almost a hard one, but a logical consequence to poor life choices.
I appreciate that. That's one of the central issues here. Well, first, let me say, from a pragmatic standpoint, for my constituents, I'm able to demonstrate that for every dollar that, and these would be tax dollars that they pay, that would go to solve an individual's chronic homeless problem, $2 extra end up getting saved that were otherwise wasted. Because we're not talking about cutting down that $82,000 per person spend per year. That's being spent in the hospital anyway. So we're talking about actually saving money. And so fiscal conservatives see the wisdom in doing this. That's the one side of it. Now, in addition to that, the business community is very interested in seeing some solution like this because it doesn't require new taxes or new appropriations. And also, as you said earlier, when you have a surge of homelessness in a place like Hawaii, individuals who are really struggling are on the doorsteps of businesses. There are some significant sanitation issues. We're a tourist state, and individuals see a lot of people in the parks and on beaches. There's that consideration. But finally, if we speak to the moral question about like the moral imperative to work, which I believe in, I mean, I work 3 jobs, okay? I'm a senator, a medical director, and an ER physician, right, to pay the bills in Hawaii. The truth is, the individuals that I'm speaking of, in all likelihood, have schizophrenia or some such mental health problem. It is almost impossible once you reach that level of chronic mental illness to function normally in society and hold down a job. And that is also just an unfortunate reality of the human condition.
Sure. Let's take a break there, Josh, and invite viewers to join us on the other side, where we'll discuss that age-old schoolhouse rock question: how might this bill become a law?
We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at wideangle@acmi.tv. For information about this episode or to view other Wide Angle episodes, visit us online at acmi.tv/wideangle.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I'm Peter Bermudez, speaking today with Dr. Josh Greene about Hawaii Senate Bill 2, which seeks to classify homelessness as a medical condition. All right, Josh, In the first half, we talked a little bit about what Senate Bill 2 does and what Senate Bill 2 doesn't do. Obviously, the 1,600, the 1,800 chronically homeless people in your state, that I gather those are the numbers, somewhere around there, paying for their care is not an inexpensive affair. So where the rubber hits the road, right, is how does something of this nature get paid for? Yeah.
Right. That's the $1 million question, or in our case, probably the $500 million question.
Mm-hmm.
Also, keep in mind, this can be extrapolated to any of the large cities, Los Angeles,
Exactly
Seattle, Boston.
Yep.
So, and even worse, because it's very expensive to get health care in a lot of other states. Sure. Right now, we have a Medicaid program like everyone else. We were a super expansion state, so we expanded by 40% when Medicaid expansion was possible under Obamacare. Mm-hmm. And every individual in my program is a subset of that population. Right now, we pay, an average of $80,000 per individual that's in this category of chronic homelessness, which, it's easy to do the math. 1,800 people times 82,000, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. If we don't do something, they will continue to exist in this same really troublesome state where they don't get much better help. They see me in the ER all the time, and I deal with their immediate problems, and then they go back out into the street. And it's more expensive over and over. Every visit to the hospital is about at least $1,500, in the ER. If they get admitted, it's thousands. So they'll be paid for by Medicaid. Right. So anything we can do to make a better program is how we would benefit from passing my bill.
And if Medicaid then classifies housing as a medical issue, then it allows you to write the prescription that you're speaking of, and for those people who are chronically homeless. And I think the number that I read is conceivably saving the Medicare system in the neighborhood, even housing, with the expense of housing people, saving the system somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million a year. Does that sound right?
That's right. And for a small state like us, that's an absolute game changer. It's maybe even more difficult to imagine that it's in the 40 to 50% range of each individual's cost, so that my fellow legislators across the country and governors and lieutenant governors and what have you, directors of health and human services, can look at their budget that's being spent on that very, very expensive, very suffering subset of people in their communities, and see that they stand to both improve the lot of those individuals' lives and all the communities around them, and also save that percentage of their budget. Because in Hawaii, we're talking about a part of our $1.2 billion high spend for these utilizers, these individuals. In just Los Angeles, the problem is 10 times larger just for the city of Los Angeles. They'll save billions.
All right, and
in a time of struggles, it's important.
And that actually, too, you speak of circumstances, certainly in other states and other urban areas. Can you speak to the issue, certainly, of people who are homeless cycling through emergency rooms, hospital emergency rooms, and seeing a very similar cost to the Medicare system as you're seeing in Honolulu, for instance?
It's absolutely, every state has exactly the same model, and it's so it's Medicaid for anyone poor and Medicare for anyone elderly, as you know, and it is identical, except it's actually a bigger savings for places like Boston. For instance, Boston's Medicare spend per person in Massachusetts, and I have relatives in Massachusetts, it's 2.5 times as much spend per Medicare patient. So you even stand to make more depending what your Medicaid budgets are.
Okay. The bill did get out of the Senate, the Hawaii Senate. It did not get out of the House of Representatives before the end of the session, I gather. But it certainly gained allies from both sides of the aisle, and I guess that speaks to the liberal notions of let's make sure people are housed, and the more conservative, let's make sure that we have money at the end of the year. Yeah.
I'm gonna be traveling the country talking about this because it's something that I can get invited by conservative groups and liberal groups to talk about. Of course, I make my pitch. I'm I'm trying to be sensible. I make my pitch appropriately to each
Sure.
group, and the broader audience of people out there watching a good show like yours can choose their political ideology,
Sure.
but they can each find some gem, I think, of hope that maybe, just maybe, once in a blue moon, we're going to have a good idea that comes out of government that also can appeal to a broad swath of people, not just one ideology or the
Right,
other.
right. Okay, so your legislature is currently in a summer break. You will be, I gather, taking up Senate Bill number 2 again next session, and just wondering how sponsors, co-sponsors seem to be shaping up. I understand that there's a pilot project in the works that you were thinking of, and to complicate all of this, of course, I gather you're running for Lieutenant Governor of the state of Hawaii.
Right.
So
Yeah,
how does all
lots
of this fit together, Josh?
Everything's complicated here. I'm even a Jewish guy married to a Mormon, so I got all kind of complications here on my end, okay?
All right.
But they're all good because we're trying to unite this planet in some good ways. So as to the sponsors, it took a lot of conversation because it's such a new idea. It's built on great ideas in smaller parts all across the housing and health spectrum. Yep. But incredibly, there's been discussions at every level, local all the way to your part of the country, which I adore and have roots in. I've spoken to the Brazilian government, the Brits. I've spoken to Spain about this issue. I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing. Everyone sees that there has to be a new model because there's not going to be new money. And so more and more sponsors come aboard. Other states, Rhode Island, California, Massachusetts have reached out to me, and I'm seeing bills kind of pop up. My colleagues, when they see my pilot, so I'm also, because I'm a private provider, I'm a doc, I'm working with some of my own friends in medicine and our hospitals, who I'm very close to actually do this, to provide alternatives to going to the ER for the chronically homeless, so that even though it won't be paid for, we're going to do it for free. We're going to actually just have facilities that will take care of individuals. We will immediately see the decrease in spending of Medicaid dollars, and it benefits them because they're overwhelmed at the other facilities. So all of these things kind of come together over time.
Let's say that there are viewers who are interested in this topic. Yeah, they want to learn a little bit more about what's going on maybe in Hawaii, maybe see what's perking across the country. A sense of resources, places to direct them in terms of organizations or websites, that sort of thing, Josh?
Yeah, so my information, and it's pretty easy to get me. I mean, I have a website, it's just my name, joshgreene.org, and we put some info there. And my cell phone is 937-0991, area code 808. I mean, I answer my phone, so 808-937-991, you know. Get me, or reach out to your legislator and have them contact me, very easy on email. All of these ways, we can quickly show documents, and I have PowerPoints, which we send over by email, and you can get the idea and how you do it. And also, if people in government are listening to this, they know that if they convince their director of human services or health to pursue this idea as a waiver, they can just get approved. Right now, it's interesting. We have a curious situation of a new person in the White House that doesn't pivot to convention. So if he thought that there were savings in some way in government, just maybe he would go for new ideas. Even though I know some people, the people who are most salty about this idea, say, hey, it's another giveaway, to which I say, well, you're going to save $2 for every one you spend. If that can break through, if I can break through that ice, then anybody might propose this. And I could see it happening in a red state or a blue state.
Well, and I will say that in Massachusetts, there is a piece of legislation that was just introduced. It's currently called House Docket 3932. It was filed by request by State Representatives Crichton and Cahill from Lynn. And I gather it seeks to do very much what it is that your bill seeks to do, yeah? It directs the Executive Office of Health and Human Services in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to work together to utilize Medicaid to provide supportive housing services for chronically homeless individuals. The bill has not been sent to committee as of our conversation today. It will be, likely, by the time that this airs, and we'll also have a House bill number. Does it seem an appropriate thing to direct viewers who are supportive of this idea to get in touch with Representatives Crichton and Cahill and perhaps their own representatives to put support behind such an act?
Yeah, if you're out there and you're watching Peter's show and you're a fiscal conservative or lean towards the right on your fiscal beliefs, tell your legislators you want to save money on Medicaid and you don't want to waste a lot of resources in the hospital for people going there for the wrong reasons.
Right.
And if you're a left-winger and you're watching Peter's show, reach out to your legislators and say this is a good idea because everyone will get housing.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you certainly for spending the time with me today. We had a bit of a Skype challenge, and you were calm through it. I appreciate that. I want to thank you, too, for your years of service in Hawaii in the legislature, in the ER room, and for offering such a big idea for us in Hawaii as well as across the country in Massachusetts to engage with. I wish you the best, certainly.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
A doctor friend of mine once told me about some tigers who had long lived in a confining zoo cage. They were in the routine of pacing back and forth from one set of bars to the other. Upon being released into a larger enclosure, however, with more room to explore, they nevertheless paced back and forth between those old sets of bars that existed only in their memories. This sort of conditioning, of course, limits the vision and behavior of we humans as well, and our efforts to tackle challenges such as homelessness. It's easy to come to believe that some long-accepted approach is the only one available. But proposals like Hawaii's Senate Bill 2 remove the bars that have long encircled us. Whether you agree with it or not, it invites us to look beyond our old cage. Let's explore that new spaciousness together and create solutions that support us all. On behalf of Josh Greene, I'm Peter Bermudez. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.